Well, hello, everyone. I just wanted to let you know my name is Kathy Vandiver, and I'm here to introduce you, as Brittany explained, to a new project called, and it's funded by NIEHS, Lessons Learned Along the Road to Environmental Cleanup. The project leads were Susan Penny from the University of Cincinnati, and she did a marvelous job in keeping us all together, let me tell you. And Marilyn Howarth from University of Penn, and myself from MIT. And we had an enormous amount of community support. And I'd just like to point out the names of Martha Stevenson and Suzanne Sullivan, who are with us in the Wilmington Superfund community. And the directors and producers were Kent Malloy, Kayla McGill, and Joyce Benchel, and they deserve a lot of credit. I'm really very pleased with how they pulled everything together. Well, the purpose of this was really to create a resource that all stakeholders could use. And as introduced already, the community organizations are included, government agencies, and industrial corporations. And the reason why I think this is pretty important is because there are very few educational resources that exist for community groups and agencies. And so, as we all know, hazardous waste cleanup is often very contentious. And there are a lot of wild emotions that groups can go through, with confusion, fear, and a lot of mistrust. So I'd like to point out that we tried some unique methods on our way. We collaborated with innovative professionals in film development. And actually our lessons learned that we pulled out were actually derived from the interviews themselves of community members and government regulators. And here I'd like to point out actually that Wilmington did not have any collection of videos and interviews. And so on this project, I suddenly found myself becoming the person who would hire the videographer, set up all the talks, recruit all the people to come, and actually do the interviewing myself. And I'm mentioning this because actually it was very beneficial for me, because before I hadn't learned that much of the history. It was been kind of crazy the way it had been taught to me about the community, and learning firsthand was really a wonderful experience. So if you need to sit down and interview people, I would suggest it as being very beneficial. There was also in the unique methods I'd like to mention that the modules include questions for reflection and a space to provide public feedback online. And we also included interactive scenarios. Each module included an interactive feature called Articulate Storyline. And I didn't know what Articulate Storyline was, but it's a way actually to take you through a simulated experience and include you in the decision making. So it's sort of like make your own adventure, and it could be very interesting. So this is actually set up also particularly for group interviewing. So the course actually takes 3 hours to do all 3 modules, but it's perfect actually to have a module for each separate meeting. Like you could have 3 meetings and do a module at a time. And I just suggest that you see module first because it contains all of the background information about the historical context of the sites, and which I think is very important. Because what you see we're doing is we are pulling from all 3 sites, and we're giving you information from interviews from all those 3. And therefore, it's really good to understand the history of the site to begin with. The course is in 3 modules, and the first one is actually, as I explained, the background. And I'll just tell you briefly, Fernald actually released radioactive uranium into the air, and Ambler, Pennsylvania was known for its asbestos contamination. And Wilmington's problem was chemical contaminants in drinking water, and these were all significant exposures. Module 2 will really talk about how to form the community groups, and module 3 is information for government agencies and companies. And I would encourage you also to look at module 3, because oftentimes it's really good to see what the people from the other side of the fence, so to speak, are thinking and what their problems are as well. So instead of showing you all the site histories, I'm just going to show you one slide today to give you that background so that I can share with you more of the interesting parts about the interviews. So as background, the 3 sites were Fernald, as mentioned earlier, and I just like to point out that some of the townspeople actually thought that this plant produced Dutch boy paint. And you can imagine their anger when they learned that the plant had been releasing massive amounts of uranium, radioactive uranium, into the air over time. Ambler had asbestos factories. You've probably heard about this before. And it was dumped into 2 large sites. And this is just one of the smaller sites behind, seen in the photograph, right next to the community. And the cancers, of course, not much was known about asbestos at that time, and the cancers evolved very late in people's lives. Wilmington, Massachusetts, the moms here discovered really alarming rates of childhood cancer. The statistical expectation was to have maybe 3 children, and there were 21 children that the moms found out in their neighborhood. They noticed and started talking in the late 1990s. And the cause was unknown for several years, so you can imagine there was much consternation in the community. I would like to mention that the community members were the ones that identified actually N-nitroso-dimethylamine, NDMA, I'll call it for sure, like everybody else, and as a probable cause of the childhood cancers. And the groundwater had contaminated with NDMA, left underground the Olin chemical site and reached the town wells. So that was the story, the backstory for that. So now I'm going to just give a list of some of the 9 lessons that were pulled out from the community's interviews. And the ones that are highlighted are the ones that I'm going to show to you in full, so you get a chance. But I'd like to call attention to some of the other numbers on this list. And one is obtain guidance from academic and technical professionals. And many times groups don't know that the EPA, for instance, will fund a technical professional for a group as well. And there, of course, the academics, as we are often can be invited to help out. And there are other reasons here to hold public meetings, and never to forget to work with your elected officials. That was very important in the case of Wilmington, where the elected officials really helped to find the finances to do the health risk, the health study. So I'm going to take you there. There's one more module I didn't describe in much detail, but that's actually the 3rd one. So you have the history for number 1, the actual interviews, and number 2, the communities, and module 3 being advising advice for the actual companies. And this is very interesting, so I suggest that you do that too. So let's go to the site. And oops. So go back. Just a second. Try it again.
Hey, Kathy, we still see your PowerPoint.
Okay, I'm changing now. Just wait a second. Can you screen share? Is it showing now?
Not yet. I think you'll have to stop sharing.
And share again?
Yes, and share your, I think it was your Firefox application.
Okay. Thank you for waiting, everybody. How's that?
We can see it. Thank you.
All right. So it's actually on the MIT website. It's also on the University of Cincinnati website as well, and also the U of Penn. One of the things we thought that I would recommend for group viewing, as well as with community groups, is also with students, particularly in courses. And I think it might help to illustrate some of the problems of communities as well. So you go down here to lessons learned. And it will take you to the actual resource. Click here, and then I'm going to stop it here just for a moment and maybe make the picture a little bigger. So how's that? So on the left, you can actually see that there's the navigation, and it's really very well done, that there is a list of introductions and main menu. And then when you get this first module again is about the background of the three cities. And I'm going to play the introduction for you so you'll get the background. And then we'll go through a scenario where we get a chance to try out making decisions. So here's the introduction.
In the late 1880s, the Keesby and Madison Company began producing asbestos pipe insulation in the small Pennsylvania town of Wissahickon. The new insulating material was a huge success, and the breadth of different uses created a boomtown-style expansion, and the village of Wissahickon became the factory town of Ambler. In the middle of the 20th century, amidst growing concerns fueled by recent memories of the Second World War, the U.S. government created the Atomic Energy Commission to aid in the production of raw materials, in this case, high-purity uranium. In 1951, the Feed Materials Production Center was built in the small rural town of Fernald, Ohio. A year later, in 1952, the National Polychemicals Company built a site in Wilmington, Massachusetts, to produce specialty chemicals for rubber and plastic production. What these three towns have in common are the unfortunate results of poor waste management practices, negligence, and the unknown long-term effects of contaminated water, soil, or air on the public. Health effects emerged in these towns, and folks began seeking, then demanding answers. The companies and government agencies were ill-prepared to react to grassroots citizen action groups who went to great lengths to educate themselves on the science behind the processes that had led to the contamination. Meetings were called between the citizen groups and the companies, often met with skepticism and mistrust on both sides. The company communications were fueled by misinformation and a desire to save face. Company representatives could not accept that these groups of people could possibly understand the complex processes involved in the production of their products. The citizen groups were full of angry people concerned about their family and friends becoming sick from the contaminated environment. This resulted in years of impasse, as each side would refuse to capitulate. Citizen groups wanted cleanup and remediation. Companies didn't want the financial burden. There had to be a way for the sides to come together, find that elusive trust, and move forward to solve environmental problems faced by their communities. These are the stories of three sites, their histories, successes and setbacks, and lessons learned. Each site represents a different point along a timeline, from the initial remediation process to completed cleanup. Wilmington is still in the early stages. Ambler is further along in the process and making progress. Fernald successfully cleaned up the one-time uranium processing plant, which is now a nature preserve. These examples illustrate how citizen groups can approach a company or agency and how the contaminating entities can respond to them. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Each site has its own complexities and distinct problems, but we hope this roadmap will prove to be a guide for anyone beginning this journey. Citizens group, company teams researching concerns, or a single person with a nagging feeling that a contaminant is probably the cause of a neighborhood's ongoing health issues.
So I'm going to next show you the scenario with articulate storyline for a wells problem. So here it is. We've got some choices to make, and I was going to ask people to volunteer, but I'm going to just move through it because I think it'll take a little less time and you'll still be familiar. So you wake up and you discover that you've washing your hands and there's a very strange chemical odor. And what will you do? You've never experienced this before. So I'm going to do this call, the plumber. Okay, so it took several days for the plumber to arrive, and the plumber has been talking and while he's working, and he says, I found some other neighborhood people who have problems. but you can't find anything wrong, particularly with piping. So what do you do now? Well, you did mention your neighbors, so I'm going to go talk to your neighbors. But you talk to your neighbors and you discover, oh, one of them knows that you can get your well water tested. It will cost you about $500, and that's really not what you had in mind. So let's see if we can find another there. There's an 800 number, and you try it. This is actually 2 weeks later already. And well, they're not answering. So why not the EPA? Let's try them. So they take a while to get back to you, but after a while they tell you that they can't help at all. It's a private well. So it looks like we have no choice but to go with using bottled water. And you discover how much water costs when you have to pay for it, especially with bottled water. So what we're going to do next, let's go to the next. Well, your son happens to be very sick and very weak, and you're noticing he's even dizzy and has bluish tint around his lips, and suddenly you're going to take him immediately to the ER. You arrive at the hospital, your son has been admitted to the emergency room, and they take blood tests, and they'll tell you in a little while exactly what's wrong. Well, 3 days later, you get the call back, and the lab has a result that informs you that you have, your son has nitrates in his blood, and suggests that you find treatment for the well water immediately, and also gives some other health advice. So you call the local health department. This is day 38 now, and you're really getting quite stressed. They're just giving you the runaround, so you decide you'll call again, maybe when you get somebody else to answer. But after that, you're really running out of options. So what can you do? So this is just given as an experience of the kinds of stress community members can experience when they're not getting any answers and they're trying to figure things out. So I'm also going to show you next how the module is organized. There's think and reflect times, particularly if you're working with a group. This is really wonderful because you'll have some great conversations around this. Have you known someone that's been affected? How has it impacted them or you? And you get to write some answers here or just discuss it at this point. And then over on the left, you can also see that there are, as Module 1 does tell you, it's going to be the tale of the 3 cities. And so there's a whole video on Ambler, Wilmington, and then also Fernald. And then at the end of it, there's also a spot for questions for reflection. And this is really good for you because you need to synthesize the information from all 3 sites, and you get a chance to talk about them with your group. And you can see some of the examples here. Why is an environmental cleanup in each of these situations so complex? If you are facing such a situation, how complicated is it? So you start to think about that and what stakeholders are involved. And think about number 4. If you lived in Amber, Wilmington, or Fernald site, how would you feel? And then module number 1 does have the opportunity for an evaluation. You can begin a survey, and then module 1 is completed at this point. So that gives you an overview now of module number 1. And on the menu lists over here on the left, you can actually see you can begin module number 2. And I had chosen out a couple of these things to show you what the interviews are like and how they're all focused around a particular question, or a theme. So this one is really informing community groups and how to form community groups and build trusting relationships. So we're going to hear from various different community members about the startup of some of their community groups and how it went for them. So I'm going to go into lesson learn number 1.
Finding yourself part of a community facing an environmental crisis can be disorienting, with a lot of emotional ups and downs. Community members may feel rage, extreme frustration, and a sense of powerlessness. Not many people are prepared for a long-term commitment to a battle that could involve countless hours of investigation, a lot of meetings, the stress of a direct confrontation, and planning on a grand scale, all of which may rob volunteers of personal time and energy.
Who knew 20-odd years ago we would still be dealing with Olin? It's been very frustrating in terms of how long it's taken.
There was a lot of trash in the wetlands, and there was a lot of contaminated waste sites. So when I heard about the childhood cancer cases in the Kelly Hill area, I was like not really surprised, because you just can't abuse the environment that badly and not have some type of repercussions for it.
A company came in and wanted to build a high-rise on the Beau Ritz site, and their proposal was to level the asbestos and put a hard surface over it and then build a 17-story high-rise. And that got the community up in arms.
Bringing about change can be a painful and time-consuming process for sure. Each environmental situation is different and comes with its own unique set of challenges. But a community in crisis must eventually realize that change is simply not possible without organization.
It takes an instant to contaminate an aquifer in the subsurface environment. It takes decades to clean it up. And communities need to be aware of that. They need to be present. They need to be persistent. They need to have the long term. And they need to keep in mind that these things are expensive. And when they ask questions about who's exposed to what and where and how much and when, they have to be persistent in getting the answers.
A number of families, especially in the western part of town, started figuring out that their children had similar diagnoses of childhood cancer. And that came as a shock to the entire town. An outgrowth of that was that the parents started trying to get the local board of health and the select board to investigate and find out, is there a possible environmental cause for our children's cancers?
Fernald had become the poster child for the environmental legacy of the Cold War. And it was just a public relations nightmare. The community was up in arms.
We knew there was contamination, but we really didn't know exactly where it was coming from and where it was going.
Once the lid kind of got blown off of it and the troubles began and the leaks began and the dust releases and all that, then I think people finally began to put 2 and 2 together and kind of figure out it wasn't a Dutch boy paint factory.
The push to try to get the information, to find out what was going on, what were you going to do to fix it?
So when I would go to public meetings, there was a lot of screaming, there was a lot of shouting, there was a lot of anger, and admittedly so. And it really was, cries of help. We need to get this place taken care of, and you got to do something about it, and you got to do it yesterday.
The women of this community got so freaked out in the early years was because these were, in our opinion, basic questions that we needed answers to. Is it safe to drink the water? Is it safe to breathe the air after these humongous dust releases? And when you have a small one, you worry. And I think we just began to ask a lot of questions because you worry about the health and safety of your child and your family.
Forming a community group whose purpose is to confront the industrial corporation or agency responsible for environmental problems can be a challenge in itself. Finding community members who want to be involved and then motivating them to stay involved for the long haul can sometimes seem impossible. So, how do you go about creating a group that is willing to work towards a solution? First of all, channel anger and frustration into positive action. Lesson learned number 1. channel anger and frustration into positive action. Once an environmental issue that potentially affects public health is identified and becomes well known to the community through press or other channels, people will naturally be angry. Their families, their livelihood, their homes suddenly feel unsafe.
You know, you got to get rid of the source of what's leaking into the aquifer and that's going into the air, because if you don't get rid of that, you're not going to do anything. You know, you're wasting your time and your money because it's still going to be there.
There was a mountain of waste asbestos, and they would have trucks that would, of course, go around, and as they dumped it, it was lower here, and it got higher and higher and higher. And I would guess it was about 50, 60, 70 feet high, and it would be powdery, and we as kids, when it would rain, it would get slick as ice, and we would get cardboard boxes, and we'd go 60, 70 feet up and slide down to the creek down below.
You know, I mean, over the years, they always talked about the asbestos, but I didn't pay any attention to it until we got older and we started actually thinking, oh, we played on that. And all, like I said before, all that white in the summertime, when they opened their windows up, we could never figure out why my aunt's window seals were all white. And later on, we found out that that was asbestos.
On Columbus Day weekend in 2002, the town issued a don't drink the water order. People were nuts. It's news spread like wildfire, but there was nobody in any of the town offices to take calls or answer questions.
Children in Wilmington had cancer. I have 3 children. My children were little at the time. I was concerned for their health also, and all the other children and their friends, and you know, anybody drinking the water.
DEP and the town called a huge meeting in town hall for Board of Selectmen. We've confirmed the presence of NDMA in the town wells, so we're shutting down those wells until we can get NDMA levels under the current standard.
I think that in cases like this where it's so sensitive with children, that families are never going to look at the Board of Health or town leadership or government to be their friend. They're going to look for them as to why this happened. So I think from the very start, it was like that. It's, you know, how did we allow this to happen and what are we going to do about it? And that's a hard barrier to break down.
Looking at you know, very potent carcinogens in the environment and trying to figure out, trying to help people to understand, you know, what was my family member exposed to? Why did they get cancer? These are not easy questions to answer.
Call your neighbors together and encourage them to express their fear, frustration, and anger. Take notes. Sympathize. Share your own feelings about the situation. Once everyone has had their say, move on to organizing a community effort that can help bring about change and give people hope. Ask potential members to come up with a list of issues and concerns they want to address.
We always knew deep in our hearts that this site had potential, serious potential, to be affecting the children and the health of the residents in town. I mean, we've only looked at one segment of the population here. And we still don't have a full picture of everything.
It took a lot of us a long time to figure out that we were stronger working together. The fewer separate organizational little groups we had, the better. It was good to gather information and convey information to our individual groups, but we thought we needed to have a better synthesis and a place where we could get the same information.
So, yeah, the Board of Health was not helpful at the beginning. You know, and once again, the citizens had to go in there and with, you know, pitchforks and demand, you know, that they do something. And they did comply eventually, and, you know, and we got a beginning of the cancer study, which was in 1999, that took 20 years to complete.
I don't exactly know why the study took as long as it did, but it did ultimately show that there was a connection between drinking the water from the Maple Meadow Brook wells and the increased incidence of cancer. The citizens' activism was very helpful in identifying a concern and staying with this concern until the ultimate conclusion of the report, the cancer study, had been done.
So that was the part about lessons learned in the beginning. And there's usually a time right afterwards where you can actually get some time to discuss with your group. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to lesson number, the one about education. Here it is.
Lesson learned number 5, education, education, education. Environmental problems often stem from industries that deal with complicated processes involving chemicals, radioactive materials, or other potentially harmful substances. In order for your organization's members to effectively communicate with industry management, regulators, and the general public, they'll have to learn about and understand those processes. Education is key to not only describing problems, but helping to formulate solutions too. At the Olin site, a self-educated group member helped solve the mystery about how 2 harmless chemicals released from the plant eventually combined into a substance that threatened the health of the community.
Her name is Debbie Duggan, and she taught herself about chemistry and looked at some of the chemicals known to have been used at Olin, and finally came up with an idea that this chemical, it's hard to say, N-nitrosodimethylamine, or NDMA we call it, was probably in our water supply, or at least in the groundwater. And the DEP people were like, you're dreaming, you're crazy. That's, how would you know about that? There was always like, what are you, who are you to know that kind of stuff? You're not a professional. We heard that a lot. You're not a professional. What do you know? But Debbie persisted, and finally in 2002, DEP agreed to have Olin sample for NDMA. And lo and behold, they found it.
The other big thing was the combination of chloride and ammonia can sometimes create, the nitrification can create NDMA. So there were a whole host of reasons why we wanted to look at NDMA.
NDMA also is a suspected human carcinogen. That obviously is a concern for the residents of the town, and also for us to do our job to make that right.
And so Debbie was really hot on the trail of NDMA. She had done a lot of research on a lot of the chemicals. She was not going to let NDMA go. And with the cancer cases in the children, why should we let it go? You have a group of, 3 mothers with no chemical education at all, nothing. And we can look at reports and we can see that there's chemicals that aren't being tested for, and that NDMA is a chemical that you should test for, but all those people with all the degrees and all the college, in all the experience, they don't know.
At Fernald, fresh group members took it upon themselves to learn as much as they could about the site, so they could prove to the Department of Energy that they deserved a seat at the table when it came to making cleanup decisions.
Well, we realized at this first meeting, we also realized how uneducated we were about what actually the plant did.
And I think they didn't think we were smart enough to put it all together and be able to do that. But we fooled them.
That RAFS decision document was 15 5-inch binders, right at about 800 Series E drawings that went with it. So that's the magnitude of what we were delivering to their house.
Well, they didn't think we would read anything, and we read everything. We just divvied them all up, and we read them, and we flagged them, and we highlighted them. And
the fresh members thought, well, we have to educate ourselves so we can talk to them and understand their language.
Ask questions, make FOIA requests, read everything you can get your hands on about the issues. Ask the industrial corporation, government entity, or other corporations to help the group understand the processes used that seem to be causing the environmental problems, or contact experts who can explain the concepts. Tap into public knowledge on the internet or at libraries.
Martha, like I said, Martha and I had been doing file reviews of other contaminated waste sites, so we had gotten fairly good at it. We knew how to read reports. We knew what to look at. We made requests at DEP to go in and review files. In those days, you could make a request to see a file, and you made a time and date. You went in, and you sat down. You asked for copies. If there were reports that weren't there, you made requests for more reports, and that's what we did. And so we did a real extensive file review of the Olin site.
we had to learn how to talk about nuclear issues. We had to learn to talk about radiation and limits and doses, and we had to talk about uranium and plutonium. And
I really didn't know that much about Superfund and the RIFS and feasibility studies and all that stuff, but you know, we do now.
we carried notebooks and tablets, and and when we'd get in the public meetings with DOE, I mean, we'd have our stuff right there to open it up and go, whoa, wait a minute.
It was their investment day after day in our public meetings and reading our reports and cutting through them and interacting with us as we went along the way, and then reporting to the larger community at large is what gradually changed it.
Dr. Emmett's expertise in this kind of, occupational hazards was also very helpful. He knew all about, asbestos, and early on was who did most of the explaining to us, and then later on EPA brought in experts to do that as well. The Citizens Advisory Group wants to be educated on the problem. They'll bring in nationally known experts and pay them and have them basically give us a lecture on different aspects of the problem.
All right, so moving on now, there's just some things to wrap up on questions that could be thoughtful for you, especially if you're in a group and you want to have a discussion. So here are some suggestions. For instance, here's number 4, write 3 clear messages to express exactly what a corporation or agency should do to arrive at an acceptable solution for these environmental challenges. So there's some good ones. There is also an evaluation survey at the very end of Module 2, and then we've completed Module 2. I'd just like to mention that there is a whole module now, but beyond that, which is really about advice to companies and government agencies, and they're really interesting, and also the one particularly about the scenario is very interesting to find out if you were handle the job of being a public relations person on one of these companies, what that would be like. So just in conclusion down here, there are questions for reflections in 3, and they're here as well. And I think that completes the overview, the quick little snippets I can give you of the project and how it's relates to, each module relates to each other. So I'm going to stop sharing. I did. Okay.
Awesome.
You're all set. Thank you.
Awesome. That was so cool, Kathy. Thank you so much for going through that and showing us some of those videos of the modules. So it's now time for the breakout rooms. We're going to divvy everybody up to the breakout rooms. Molly just put the 2 questions in the chat that we would like for everybody to discuss. In the breakout rooms, the first one is, what was the takeaway from viewing this? And then how would you describe this resource to a community member? And also any other feedback that you'd like to share. We'll be taking notes in all of these breakout rooms. So please have some great discussion. Molly is putting people in breakout rooms right now. And so if you all could join those and talk about the feedback. We'll bring you back in about 8 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you all had some great discussions and got some good notes. We have a couple of minutes for some questions. If anybody has any questions for Kathy about the modules, if you can raise your hand, take yourself off of mute, put the question in the chat. Kim, looks like you have a question.
Sure. Our group was discussing budget. Do you have a range of how much this might cost to put together something similar, even if it was just one story as opposed to 3? Oh,
Kathy, you're muted.
Yeah. No, I hadn't thought about that. Basically, it turns out I was really lucky. I could later on write you what the videographer cost, but it's not that was not the whole project for sure. And but since I wasn't the PI, Susan Penny was there. You might be able to direct your questions to her in the future if you'd like to have a little more information. She wrote a grant first of all, and then it got postponed because of COVID. And even for me in the beginning, trying to get people to get interviewed was kind of hard because we were just on the tail of that. But I'm sorry, I really don't have a good, maybe other people in this group might have an idea about how much it would cost.
I know videographers aren't cheap.
This one, many of the good ones actually has set up 2 cameras, and so that you don't get, there's a little bit more change in the viewpoint of the person speaking, and that keeps interest.
Just to follow up on Kim's question, Kathy, I was wondering whether you applied for a separate grant from a foundation or some other federal agency or from NIH, and how you sort of really saw that coming together a little bit. And then maybe you could tell us a little bit about the logistics involved in terms of how you worked with the videographers.
That's all right. I've been having trouble with my words today for sure. So I'm really lucky. As I mentioned, Susan Penny was the one who's the PI on the project. And so she wrote a grant. It was, I believe it was a supplement, an NIEHS supplement. And it took a lot longer, as I mentioned, to getting it done. And basically, what was unique was the Joyce Bentel, who was one of the producers. She had worked on one of these sites before, and therefore she was very savvy about thinking about trying to pull out the lessons learned. So in other words, I ended up doing a lot of the videoing and making up questions and things like that. And there's an awful lot that's on the cutting floor, let me tell you. So it's you need to have somebody who is really very strong about what they want the end product to be, because occasionally the producers fell back on saying, can't we just give a history of these 3 things separately, and then to actually have to listen to hours and hours and pull things out that you would think would be the main themes on each of these things. It took a lot of work. And so I guess I just want to say, I think you've got to have very dedicated people who want to do it to start and stick to the main themes that you really want to bring out. I don't know if I'd answered that question, but I tried.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
And in the interest of time, we're going to have to move on to grantee updates. But thank you again so much, Kathy, for that great presentation, and everybody for the discussion. And we'll be sending those notes from the different breakout groups to Kathy. So we will move on to grantee updates. Up first, we have the University of New Mexico. And Carolyn, I believe you're giving that update.
Yep. Hi, thanks. You can go to the next slide. I'm giving the update for our UNM Metal Center, focusing on uranium mining in the Southwest. First, we have some awards and honors. Our Deputy Director, Dr. Jose Cerrato, was at the White House recently
for a forum on campus and community scale climate change solutions. And our director, Dr. Johnny Lewis, was awarded the 2023 John P. Wyatt Environmental and Health Award from University of Kentucky, and she recently traveled there for their symposium to give her talk. Next slide. Last month, our monthly metals meeting was focused on PFAS remediation and it as an emergent concern in New Mexico. We invited presenters from both academia and government to give talks, and we had Pat Longmire from New Mexico Environment Department, Brian Chaplin from University of Illinois Chicago talking about PFAS remediation, Dan Agnew from the Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority, and Kim Basner from the USGS talking about some of the work they're doing. Next slide. A couple weeks before that, we had a community listening session with the communities from the Redwater Pond Road on Navajo Nation, one of our partner communities, and also from the Eastern Navajo Dene Against Uranium Mining. Folks joined our metals team for a listening session and community session on the work we're doing there. Next slide. One of our other communities, the Pueblo of Laguna, had a feast day in March where we had a table disseminating some of our information. This is some of the examples of the information, and we've kind of extended this to be activities also for kids to kind of get involved and start talking about issues in Laguna. We're now kind of focusing on some of the agricultural issues and metals uptake into plants. Next slide. And then finally, 3 of our recent publications kind of highlight our work on plants, animals, and humans. The top one, the Portman et al. Publication, focuses on fungi that are associated with plant growth in a New Mexico uranium mine, and characterized fungi associated with plants and identified candidates for bioremediation work. The second publication used GIS and collared livestock and actually monitored where livestock would graze and would model environmental exposure of livestock. So these have come directly out of community concerns about agriculture and livestock, which they rely heavily on. And the final publication is in the Journal of Translational Autoimmunity. It's a pilot study of rural miners showing differences in biomarkers of immune dysregulation. So kind of one of the take-home messages of a lot of our biomedical research is that it's not one disease that's implicated in having these environmental exposures to uranium and heavy metals. It's really a bunch of autoimmune and inflammatory diseases that we see across the board with chronic exposure. So that's the end of my update. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks for that update, Carolyn. Up next, we have UNC, and I believe Megan's giving that update. Megan, are you still on the line?
Yes, I'm here. Hi, everyone. I'm giving the update for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm first going to start with a couple of CECRT specific updates. For our Well Empowered study in Union County, North Carolina, our team just recently developed and disseminated report back materials for private well water samples that were collected through a community science approach. We had 224 samples that we've been reporting back results, and we will have a report back meeting in late May to discuss with the community. Dr. Andrew George and Dr. Kathleen Gray have been working with the UNC Environmental Finance Center. They've been analyzing challenges of connecting private well users to public water infrastructure in North Carolina, and this is part of a project that's funded by the UNC Policy Collaboratory and our SRP. And then we have a couple of recent publications, one from our team communicating results of drinking water tests from private wells, and one in press on drinking water disparities in North Carolina. Next slide, please. And then a few updates just from our center in general. Dr. Julia Ragers with our DMAC, and she presented at Duke University's symposium in the spring on a systemic review and comp talks data case study. Our director, Dr. Rebecca Fry, was one of 3 UNC researchers who shared her research and ongoing examples of work in rural North Carolina with 16 senators and representatives from the North Carolina General Assembly, and has since been in communication with them for some potential policy change. Dr. Fry also was featured in an article about her work in improving a healthier North Carolina with our public health school, and Dr. Fry with Dr. Orlando Cornell, which is in our Project 5. They were featured on some PFAS research in the Carolina Public Health Spring issue. And that's our updates. Thanks.
Great, thanks Megan for that update. Up next, we have UC Berkeley, and Cleanna, I believe you're the one that's going to give that update.
Hi, yes. On April 14th, we held a center meeting that focused on training engagement with stakeholders, and the trainees presented research updates, and there were discussions on open access publishing and data sharing. And there was a really interesting discussion after on findings, approaches, and all kinds of pertinent information with the stakeholders from Cali PA's Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, Department of Toxic Substances Control, USA EPA Region 9, ATSDR Region 9, and Geoscientech. And based on feedback, it was very enjoyable, and we're planning to do this kind of format every 6 months. Next slide, please. CEC's Claire Pace co-planned the Climate and Environmental Justice Conference 2023, which was held at Santa Clara University. On April 27th, Claire co-organized and co-moderated a panel, Creating Change for Water and Climate Justice in California and Central America. And she presented a poster with trainee Ari Libinson on the left on pesticide use and socioeconomic vulnerability in domestic well communities. The goals of the conference were to build partnerships, spread a community-driven participatory approach, and create opportunities for philanthropy by centering race, indigeneity, and income, networking, co-producing actionable knowledge, and educating and training for transformation. Next slide, please. Claire also led a workshop on the drinking water tool, the details on the left, and a networking session on water equity in tribal communities and communities of color. And links to the conference page, the speakers, and the recordings are on the slide. Next slide, please. A couple of papers, I'll go over these quickly. This also co-authored by Claire is a paper that integrated various data sources and revealed disparities in manganese concentrations in domestic well communities and community water systems. The paper highlights a need for additional data and point of use treatments to address this issue. Next slide, please. This is a paper which was published by David Sedlak and former trainee Yang-Hu Duan. It advances the use of low-cost stainless steel electrodes and decontamination of drinking water. What they did in this case was they modified conditions to enable the approach to remove trace organic contaminants from an authentic surface water sample. Previously, it was shown to treat a contaminant in extremely pure water. Next slide, please. Updated findings from the toxic tide study, co-authored by CEC's Laura Cushing, Rachel Morello-Frosch, trainee Seigi Karasaki, and their collaborators, show that a large number of toxic sites would be impacted by coastal flooding or groundwater intrusion under a high-risk scenario and would disproportionately impact people of color. Accompanying the paper is an interactive online tool that overlays a map of at-risk sites and social indicators of vulnerability. And the findings were reported on CNN and other outlets. Next slide, please. Commentary was co-authored by Rachel Morello-Frosch, illustrating the structural underpinnings of racial health inequities and climate change, and calls on physicians and health practitioners to move beyond mitigation at the individual level to advocating for systemic change. Next slide, please. Jenny Rempel, who's one of the trainees in CEC, co-authored a commentary on water equity that highlights successes and areas for improvement and action. Next slide, please. In recognition of Jenny's work on water equity, she was awarded a 2023 UC Berkeley Human Rights Fellowship, which will support her partnership with the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability and her community engaged work to assess short-term drought emergency programs and water adaptation processes. Next slide, please. 2 more. Trainee Manrana was awarded Bernard D. Tebbins Memorial Award from the American Industrial Hygiene Association's NorCal section, and she presented her work on March 14th. And next and last, finally, trainees in our DMAC core are members of a team that won 3rd place in the NIH Long COVID Computational Challenge, so taking some of their data into the real world applications. Thank you.
Thanks, excuse me, thanks, Cleona. Lots of updates from you guys today. Up next, we have Yale, and Nicole, I believe you're the one giving that update.
Yes, hi everyone, thank you. I just wanted to give a brief update about some recent events from our Community Engagement Core. Next slide. So we are, a new Superfund center in our first year, and we're focused on drinking water contaminants of emerging concern. And our study area is Nassau and Suffolk counties on Long Island, New York, and it's an area that has many Superfund sites and historically has had elevated levels of 1,4-dioxane, among other contaminants. Next. So this past month, we launched two major initiatives with our community partner, Citizens Campaign for the Environment, whose we co-lead the Community Engagement Core. So we created a fact sheet about 1,4-dioxane, which Citizens Campaign distributed to their members at numerous speaking events. It was circulated to journalists, other stakeholders. So getting a wide distribution of this new fact sheet. And then to coincide with Earth Day and Earth Week, we did a webinar called Lunch and Learn, again, coordinated by Citizens Campaign for the Environment. And this was we jointly presented information about drinking water, environmental exposures, and 1,4-dioxane. And it was, it involved speakers both from Yale and our community partner group, Citizens Campaign for the Environment. Next. Yeah, and this is a photo of Adrian Esposito, the co-community engagement core lead. And just to highlight that we had over 50 people attend this webinar, including some journalists. And after doing this webinar, we had over 300 people, community members, sign up for more information about the Yale Superfund Center, and also express interest about potentially participating in our exposure and health study, which was one of our projects, our research projects. So that was a really fantastic response that we were really excited about. Next. And this webinar got a lot of media attention. So there were several news stories in the local media, which again just contributed to more people signing up for more information about the Superfund Center. So that's going to be a great resource to push out information and research translation, as well as also serve as a basis for when we initiate recruitment for our exposure studies. And I believe that's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nicole. It's exciting to see 300 people signed up after that, so that's great. And last but not least, we have updates from Columbia University, and I believe Whitney is giving those updates.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm giving the updates for Columbia SRP. So last month we had our really big meeting in South Dakota that started with a research symposium by Missouri Breaks. So here you see a bunch of pictures of, the team and other, like our community partners and community members from South Dakota, Pine Ridge, and OST giving presentations. Next slide, please. Then we had our actual external advisory committee. Brittany, I'm so sorry you weren't able to go. But we invited members of the community as well to kind of, participate really in research that is very important to them and research that involves them. So here you see a picture of our trainees, Tracy Zacher, who's the field director for Missouri Breaks. And then in the center, our external advisory committee. And that happened over the course of last week, like I said, on April 21st. Next slide, please. We also started the water sampling for our project 1. You see a bunch of our team members as well as Missouri Breaks team members doing the private groundwater sampling for the testing and the isotope tracing that we're going to do in the rest of our projects. Next slide. And just to highlight one of our investigators, Allison Kupsko, she's the co-PI for projects 3 and 4. She was awarded the Calderon Junior Faculty Award winner for her research in extracellular vesicle microRNAs at the interface of prenatal air pollution and childhood obesity. Next slide, please. And we're announcing our next monthly webinar seminar by Mason Stahl. He's an associate professor at Union College, and he's going to present a hydrologic insight into arsenic and uranium contamination across the Northern Plains. I'm going to drop the registration link in the chat in a little bit. Next slide, please. And then we're also having, and I hope that you guys can disseminate this to anybody who's interested. We're having an Indigenous environmental health research workshop. Registration is open and will be open until May 31st. So if you have any, or you yourself are interested in participating in this workshop, we obviously would like people who self-identify as Indigenous to join as well. But this is a partnership, a very big partnership across, the MIT SRP, us, University of Pharmacy, the College of Pharmacy at New Mexico, Missouri Breaks, OSU, and the University of Arizona. So if anyone needs more information or wants more information, please feel free to, let me know in the chat, and I'll email you guys all the information that I have regarding this workshop. And I think that's it.
All right, thanks Whitney for that update. And I'm so bummed that I wasn't able to make it to the symposium. It was, can't get around bad weather, unfortunately.
Can't do that, no.
All right, now just a couple minutes to hang on, a couple more announcements for y'all. Next slide, please. So we're gonna try something in July. Next month we have another a webinar scheduled, but for July, we're gonna try doing an offer and ask breakout session. I'm gonna send an email around to everybody to make sure that we have you binned in the correct categories. And we're gonna try to do a more of a breakout group discussion type of thing based on what you guys had in your offers and asks based on the main media that y'all work in. That was kind of the easiest way I could try to bin everybody to get the most groups and to have a good discussion. So I'll send an email around, and if you see any issues, please let me know. We're gonna try this in July, so I hope you all can make it in July. Next slide, please. Our last two sessions of our Progress and Research webinar series are happening this Friday and next Friday. So please register and join. The other two are archived, and everything is on our website, all the registration links. I'll be sending those around as well. And next slide, please. If we are going to start planning the Research Translation and Engagement satellite session for the annual meeting. So if you would like to be on the planning committee for the satellite session for this year's annual meeting, please email me and copy Danielle Carlin. Everybody is welcome to join. So please let me know, and we'll be in touch after we get a group of people that would like to join the planning committee. Next slide, please. Just as a heads up, we are changing the way that the way our newsletters and things are sent via email. We're using a new template called Gov Delivery. So our research briefs, our e-posts, and our science digest will all be delivered via this Gov Delivery template. It's going to be from the same email. It's going to be the same content. It's just going to look a little different. Nothing's really going to change. It's just going to look a little bit nicer. It's been revamped to be a little more modern. So just as a heads up for you all, new format and new banners. I think that's the last slide, or might be, oh, and just as a reminder, we've got some new public health impact stories. Check out the research briefs and our science digest, and continue putting stuff in the data collection tool and sending us all your great information and pictures and all that jazz. I believe that should be our last. All right, thanks y'all for sticking around a couple of extra minutes. Thank you again, Kathy, for going through that great presentation and your great tool that you developed. I will see you all in June 8th from 2 to 3:15. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.